You're listening to the Afterburn Podcast, episode number 21.
Altitude.
Tower, Delaware Station is release to you, runway 4 left, wind 040 at 5, clear for takeoff.
Seat tied, altimeter 0 eyes, we're clear for takeoff, clear for the airspace. Viper check 2. My burn ramp curve was at 354. Line set.
Viper 01, be advised, the restricted area 6002 is still active.
Lights on.
Next picture 16, 13,000,
Viper 1 targeted.
I'm just like completely dazed and like thrown back in my seat, and there's just paper flying everywhere. I'm like, what the, and I just pulled back on the stick to get away from the ground. And that's when I'm like, I kind of look around, I'm like, shit, my canopy's gone. Like, that doesn't make sense. So lowered my seat to get out of the wind blast. And then, so then I can at least get my wits about me. Like I said, it felt like a sucker punch.
That's the voice of my guest today, Major Brett Devries. He's an A-10 pilot, guardsman up in Michigan. And in that clip, he's talking about the time his canopy was blown off the jet during a strafe. Quite an interesting story, to say the least. We're going to dig into that as well as his aviation career. Before we get rolling into the podcast, just a few admin notes. Thanks to all those who have subscribed and left a rating and a review over on iTunes. That definitely helps the podcast out. Also like to thank my Patreon supporters. That helps me keep the podcast going. And I'd like to thank Wingman Watch for sponsoring this episode. Swing over to wingmanwatch.com. You'll see some incredible timepieces. They're perfect for the holiday season. If you're a group and want to build a watch for your organization, again, swing over to wingmanwatch.com. They'll get everything started. All you have to do is just provide some initial inspiration, and they'll take it from start to finish and handle all the logistics. Again, wingmanwatch.com. With all the admin knocked out, let's get into the episode with Major Brett 2-Watt Devries.
Well, sweet. We'll get rolling here. Right. 2-Watt, thanks for joining me on the podcast today. As we get rolling into this, would you kind of just give everyone like a 30-second elevator pitch of who you are and what you're doing today, and then we'll dive into your career?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm a major in the Michigan International Guard, flying the A-10s part-time, and then full-time airline pilot, fly the A320 captain there. And that's pretty much it. I got 19 years in with the Guard. I'm just riding out to the end to get to my 20, and then I'll be punching that ticket and moving on from that. So.
Yeah, congrats. That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
I would like to kind of talk about the Guard aspect. I do get a lot of people that ask me, hey, I want to become a pilot and I wanted to go into the Guard or Reserve. Your path, obviously, I think is more of the norm, and that would be a generalized statement, but you're prior enlisted and then transitioned to officer. Can you kind of tell me a little bit about that process and what it was like for you?
Yeah, sure. So I had a pretty good leg up on most people don't even know about the Guard or how it works. Just I found out from going through UPT and everything. So my dad was active duty, flew F-15s and F-5s, got out of the active duty, went to the Guard in Michigan to the squadron I'm in, flew Vipers there and retired from there. So going through, growing up, I saw him flying jets. I knew that's what I wanted to do. And when I was like a senior in high school, he's like, all right, man, if you really want to do that, here's the path I recommend. I did active duty. I would strongly recommend you try to get a Guard slot. And it's a lot more flexible. And it's just, for whatever reasons in his personal career, he was like, that's the route I would recommend.
Yeah.
So we went out there, and he saw some buddies that were flying out there, got me into life support, now known as AFE. And then he's like, all right, this is where I end, and it's all in your hands now. And so I enlisted, joined, went off to basic training after high school, and then through college was a part-time guardsman working in the fighter squadron. And then my senior year of college is where, like, once you're in that 6 months from graduating, they'll let you start applying. We just so happens like we have a pilot slot open right when I get in that window. So I interviewed, got that job. And then after I graduated from college, had to do a quick deployment to Balad as a life support technician. And then I went off to officer school and all that from there.
Dude, I showed up to pilot training, and there were like 4 guardsmen in my pilot training class.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go fly a Viper. I'm gonna go fly a KC-135. And that was the first time that I realized the Guard and Reserve existed really and how it worked. I'm like, how do you already know what you're gonna go do? So it is a really, I don't know if it's a well-kept secret, but it's a great path and another obviously way to get into the cockpit and serve your country and do in a little bit different fashion.
Yeah, for sure.
But as an A-10 guardsman, you're part time. I know you do some full time work in there. You're obviously the airman citizen. You deploy in there a few times, flying the Mighty Hog, right?
Yeah. I done as flying wise in the A-10. I've done 2 Afghanistan and then 1 to Kuwait for OIR. So we're kind of the guard is, we're right in there with the deployment cycle with the active duty. The only difference being that traditionally we do like a 3-month versus 6-month deployment in that. And that's kind of gone back and forth. We did 1 6-month to Kuwait, and that was just to prove that the guard could do what the active duty could do, I guess. But I don't know that was successful on any end. But we're back to the 3-month deployment window now. So
that's a sweet spot.
Yeah. But yeah, it's the same side. I mean, you stay CMR. The sortie requirements are a little less than an active duty squadron. But you got CMR requirements, and you got the RAP tasking message and all the requirements that any active duty squadron has. There's a guard column in there as well to make sure that your squadron is CMR and greened up to go to combat.
Yeah, the CMR combat mission ready. So that's all the qualifications and the currencies that you need in order to go out there and fly your weapon system. For those that aren't familiar with that term, but which I imagine it presents some challenges between flying an A320, bouncing back and forth between civilian life and the guard life, making sure you have those currencies. How is that balance for you?
Yeah, no doubt. So that, one thing the guard does pretty well, I think, is so you come home from UPT you come home from your B course and you get, 2 to 3 years usually of full-time flying. And the idea would be at least a 2-ship, I think the Hog is different than the Viper. We do a 2-ship and a 4-ship separate upgrades. But you at least want to get a guy through a 2-ship and ideally through a 4-ship qual while he or she is still out there full-time. And then they, can choose whether they want to pursue full-time guard career or go to the airlines. And, it's usually like the inverse of the economy. And right. So like right now, getting a full-time guard slot's like impossible, but a year and a half ago, like our lieutenants were getting the full-time slots because nobody wanted them. So, but to maintain that proficiency, that's why you really got to nail down when someone comes back from pod training to build the foundation so that they can go off and then be able to come back and not try to do a whole lot of upgrades in a part-time status, because that's very challenging. So for me, I'm an instructor and a CFI evaluator, and that's very challenging as the aircraft evolves. To kind of switch cockpits and everything is a big challenge, and I've kind of had to dial back a little bit on my instruction because I can't stay up to date on all the latest TTPs and the latest technology that we have in tactics in the A-10 to be able to effectively instruct that to a young guy. But and then when you go to deploy, you usually come out for about 2 months beforehand and you fly a bunch to kind of get spun up and get caught up and get ready to go. But you always feel like you're one step behind. I don't know, maybe that's the same thing in active duty, because you're out, active duty seems like they do a lot of other admin type of jobs that we don't have to do as a part-time guardsman. So I don't know. There's trade-offs, I guess, but it definitely is a unique set of challenges, I guess. But
yeah, I think for me, so I hung it up after I left active duty and now doing a non-flying job in the reserves. But my biggest fear was the fact of being the guy who's going to get drug around the airspace, or just keeping current. And also I did demo for the last 2 years, and all the changes that happened in the Viper in that 2 years alone. I mean, the tactics changed, the software changed. That's a lot to keep up with. And I imagine, if you're doing that back and forth for an entire career, like you said, it presents some unique challenges.
Yeah, for sure. But it's like I said, anytime we're going to go TDY, anytime we're going to deploy, there's resources available to come out there and, you spend a month or two full time out there just flying in the sim and the books and trying to get caught up and get up to speed on everything. So
yeah, no doubt. Well, one cool thing I like about the Air Force is the fact that it's a small world. So Shiv, the A-10 demo pilot, connected us. We're going to talk about one of your sorties in particular a little bit later in the podcast. But again, talk before we started hitting record here. I was in Gaylord, Michigan, the only time I've ever been in Michigan in my entire life, about a month before you had a significant event in the A-10, again, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But backing up prior to that, Operation Inherent Resolve, you and I, again, were kind of texting back and forth. We high-fived. I was leaving and you were coming in, but part of that is ripping out with the unit that you're replacing and doing some exchange or flying with the guys who'd been in theater to kind of get the knowledge passed on. So my second to last sortie, I would say, was one that got the blood pressure going. A-10 threw a fan blade through a motor. and they ended up diverting into Al Assad. The initial radio call we got from them was, "Hey, I'm going to get out of the jet," and they're just trying to limp this A-10 in there. Fortunately, it worked out, but my Operation Inherent Resolve time was a pretty busy time. I imagine you guys were pretty busy as well.
Yeah. So so we got there and we ripped out the guard squadron that you were flying with while you guys were there. And we were, our role in that fight was kind of twofold, but a big one was for 24-hour combat search and rescue, airborne coverage. And so we found our way where we normally wouldn't be in a lot of strike package, working with you guys and a lot of the other partner forces. Not at all what we normally do, being in a strike package. But as we would go into Syria and areas out there, they wanted to have Sandy ones on station so that we could respond quickly to any downed air crew. So that kind of brought us into a lot of part of the fight that we wouldn't normally be in. But then also with that, we were also doing our traditional casts. And while we were there, it was mostly of Ramadi is where it fell. And that's where we did most of our work while we were there. We weren't flying into Mosul or anything like that yet while we were there, but we were plenty busy doing all that stuff. And it was, I imagine it's probably the same for you. We were flying every other day, blitzing up from Kuwait, 1.5 to 2 hours just to even get to the AO, and then you do a 3 to 4 hour bowl, then 2 to 3 hours home. So my average sortie length there was like a 7.8.
Yeah.
Every other day for 6 months. I mean, it was a grind, but it was awesome. As I'm sure you can attest to, we were busy. We were shooting, every weapon capable in the A-10 Mavericks. Our first time anyone dropped a GB-54 in combat was our squadron, like creating makeshift profiles out of a traditional JDAM because it hadn't even it had just left the 422, and they're like, here's this GB-54. You guys can try this out there and let us know how it works, type of thing. So. It was a very, very exciting and for the most part, a very successful deployment for us in our squadron.
The CSAR aspect of it, that's a big piece. I know, for us, when we were there, especially in the last half of our deployment, it was a big focal point. So one of the Jordanian pilots we flew with, and actually we had one of our wing patch was the flight lead or the mission commander that day, who ended up sparing out twice. And having to pass it off to the Raptors, but he was leading the 2 ship of Jordanians as well. One of them went down, he got captured, and he was executed. Part of the problem is there was no one remotely even close that could come and help him out. So CSAR became a big focal point that I think we neglected, or I don't say neglected, but it was kind of an afterthought. It was like, it's going to be good. So it's interesting to hear, see the change and what happened in forward deploying CSAR assets. When you guys were in those strike packages, I guess it was primary CSAR and then like a secondary or tertiary role as some kind of striker usually?
Yeah, I mean, they would, assuming you guys were you Weasel call sign when you were there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Weasel.
So the ones I was in, Weasel was always the mission commander, and it was always like, hey, just stay by us. And so we would kind of flow in the same lane as Weasel, and we would get, a couple bomb targets, or whatever. And usually we would go do that and then we'd roll right into CAS afterwards. So, but they're awesome. They're cool. They would always make sure we at least got to drop something on those things, because it's a long, for us to go out to Syria from Kuwait. I mean, it's a long trek for us to go do that. So that was, that was all cool and all positive. We didn't have any that I'm aware of any bad experiences on any of those strike packages, even though, like I said, it's something we don't do. Like that's not in our training or mindset or mentality at all. It's not what our airplane was designed for, but I think we made it work. They weren't waiting on us too long.
Yeah, it's that was such a weird dynamic, right? Where everyone was coming from. And again, I think we were obviously we were in Syria because we could go from point A to point B a little bit quicker than you guys.
Yeah.
But then you're out there alone and afraid if anything goes south. So
yeah.
I kind of want to transition here. The big piece where I found it, I think people have probably seen this. There's an A-10 2017 that made Air Force times. An A-10 is a picture sitting on a runway with no gear extended. It's up in the wheel well. So you were involved in a mission or training sortie where you had a malfunction of the gun, blew the canopy off, did a bunch of damage while you're doing a strafe. Subsequently, the gear wouldn't come down. Can you kind of start from the beginning of that sortie? What was going on that day? And then what happened?
Yeah, sure. So I was the instructor in a 4-ship upgrade ride. So a guy has been a 2-ship flight lead for probably about a year, and we're just doing a BSA, basic surface attack, dropping bombs and shooting the gun and doing some Maverick simulated attacks. And we do our bombs first, and we were doing low angle strafe. And the jet I was flying that day when we were in Kuwait, that jet during a close air support mission, the gun seized up and stopped firing, and they couldn't fix it overseas. So I never flew another combat mission there. We brought it home, and our weapons troops had taken it apart and put it back together, like just to try to figure out what. Like no one could understand why this thing was doing what it was doing. And so this was an OCF, an operational check flight on the gun. This is when I was out there as a full-time AGR instructor scheduler. I scheduled myself for it because you get to go out with like a little over half gun and kind of put it through its paces. Normally we would shoot about 100 rounds training mission, and I was going to go shoot 600. So I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And so we had done, there was like a profile I was supposed to do with the gun, just to put it through all the different kind of paces it could go through before they would sign it off. And on the second pass, it was a 2-target strafe. So we do the A-10, we do low angle strafe. So it's like a 3 to 5, ideally like a 5-degree dive angle. And you can do 1 burst or you can do 2-target strafe. So there's 2 tanks, and I'm going to shoot both of them. So I'm going to open fire at about a mile slant range, and then at shift, and then shoot the other one at about 0.7 mile slant range.
How high are you starting? How high do you guys start for low angle strafe?
So I'm running in at 100 feet, and then I unmask to acquire, and it usually, you end up, probably 600 to 900 feet at the apex, and then you roll out and you just drive it into a mile, and then that's when you would start shooting. So first trigger squeeze on this, everything works fine. I shift, and at this point I'm probably at 150, 130 feet AGL, and then the gun just locked up. And I'm like, oh shit, there it goes, and then all of a sudden it's like I'm just like completely dazed and like thrown back in my seat, and there's just paper flying everywhere. I'm like, what the, and I just pulled back on the stick to get away from the ground. And that's when I'm like, I kind of look around, I'm like, shit, my canopy's gone. Like that doesn't make sense, so lowered my seat to get out of the wind blast, and then then I can at least get my wits about me. Like I said, it felt like a sucker punch. It was just a very confusing few seconds there, like what just happened.
Yeah.
And then I realized, so the way the Grayling range is set up, the Army owns half, and then actually the Army owns the whole thing. They lease out the bombing range to us, but they're out there shooting artillery and 50 cal and stuff. And so we had a deconfliction line where we couldn't go any further south. And then I realized I'm like right in the middle of the Army artillery that's shooting.
Right where you want to be.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like yelling on the radio to get them to shut off the artillery, and they can't hear me, because it's super loud. And she's like, what are you saying? The RCO is just all confused. And so I'm like, well, I just, duck down, get skinny, and fly out of here. And then have my wingman join up. He was one of our wingmen in the flight, was an SCF pilot. So we had him rejoin up just because I don't know, he's more familiar with the systems and everything on the jet than the other guys would have been. So we climbed up 2,000 feet, the controlled ejection altitude. We climbed up about to that. There was some thick cumulus clouds out there. So we kind of were, maneuvering around those as we were going towards Alpena, which is it's a combat readiness training center that's in northern Michigan. It's about 40 miles from the range. So that's where our primary divert is off of our bombing range. So head over there and do a controllability check, battle damage check, all this. There's a bunch of, wingman saw me a bunch of panels flapping underneath the nose where the gun is. And it's not unheard of that the A-10 lands gear up. It's kind of designed as a combat redundancy in it, where the wheels are exposed. You can land, it'll rest on its main without the nose touching, and you do have braking capability. So it's not, and that happens every couple of years. So I'm like, all right, man, we'll try to get the gear down and see what happens. And I go to lower it. He's right underneath me in a chase formation, about 10 feet or so. And he's like, as soon as I lower it, he's like, put the gear back up. And so the door had tried to open for the nose, but it got stuck in one of the panels that was open. But the mains were coming down. But in the A-10, you can land, the checklist says all gear up or all gear down, but nothing in between. Anything in between is an ejection recommendation. So luckily the mains came back up, and I was like, all right, well then I don't know why the canopy's gone. Makes no sense to me. How the
Yeah.
gun and the canopy would be connected. I don't know. Like I don't really trust the ejection seat at this point. I don't really want to bail out of this aircraft. And so like we're just gonna land gear up and go in. And we went in. I couldn't talk to tower, couldn't talk to anybody. So my wingman was like kind of relaying. I could yell to him enough to where he could understand what I was saying. But
Could you hear him?
Gave his, well, yeah, I could actually hear him just fine. It was just he couldn't hear me, and I could hear the tower. And they're like, "Yeah, your landing's at your own risk," type of deal. And we go in, land, and those wheels, they were exposed. They ended up blowing. Like they, I guess the brakes seized up when I was braking down the runway, and both tires blew, which was actually. When the first one blew, I started to fishtail off the runway. And that was like my fear all along was like, if I couldn't control it off the runway, then I'm just like sitting there out in the open, about to eat a bunch of dirt with a jet on top of me. But the other one blew and then the jet settled and it just grinded to a halt and did an emergency ground egress. And I'm a short guy. So I thought without the gear down, I'd be good to just jump out the side, but it was even more of a drop than I thought it would be, and kind of busted up my ankle a little bit on the runway as I jumped out of it and hobbled away with the, little shameful hobble off the side of the jet. but yeah, no, that was it, man. The whole thing for like when the gun exploded to when we landed, it was like 20 minutes. So it really, I don't know. There really wasn't a lot of time to do much other than, can we get the gear down? Nope. All right, let's just go ahead and roll the dice with the gear up.
That's wild. So I'm backing up some from rolling in at 900 feet ish to rolling down the chute. How long are you on final there, roughly?
In BSA, you're practicing the mechanics of shooting, so it's a little longer than normal than what you would be tactically.
Okay.
But you're probably, from when I start to roll out on final till I'm on the trigger, I don't know, 5-6 seconds, probably.
Yeah, and then you said, you realized the gun, you recognized the gun seized, and then the canopy and then the chaos ensued. So it's probably a half a potato or something like that. I assume your tape's probably still recorded.
It's funny. The tape was broken when I called the Red Ball for it, and they're like, "Yeah, just press without it." So there's no HUD footage of mine of any of it at all.
Oh man, that would have been.
That's 100% truth too.
Yeah. Didn't forget to turn your tapes on.
Yeah. So no HUD tape on it. So everything's just kind of like, guesstimation on the altitude and all that stuff. But the reason the canopy actually went off was when the gun exploded. You got the T-handle, the ejection on the side of the jet. You see like the little warning on the side right underneath where the pilot sits, so they can pull that handle, blow the canopy, and get a incapacitated crew member pilot out of the jet. Well, that debris, when the gun exploded, snagged that wire and just pulled it and just ripped it off the jet.
Okay. I was going to ask, how are those two connected? Because I would assume the canopy is like electric. Yeah, like a separate hydraulics, something like that, but not tied.
They're definitely not connected. But that's how that ended up happening. So I guess it just, luckily, and all the times before that hadn't happened. But yeah, just I don't know. Yeah,
the golden BB. I cannot imagine, because you say you're at 130 feet. The Viper low angle strafe recovery is 75 feet. So you guys got to be somewhere around there. So
yeah,
there's not a whole lot of time between 150 feet and the ground, period, when you're going 300-ish knots, let alone when the canopy blows off and you're trying to figure out what's going on. Obviously, survival instinct of getting away from the trees and pointing the blue sky, but I can't imagine just the chaos and the confusion that would have created for me. I would just be like, what is happening right now?
Yeah. And I reached over at one point to try to mess with my radios, and then like the wind snagged my arm back, and I had to like pull it with my other arm to get it back out of like the wind blast. And then after that, I'm just like, I'm not doing anything. I'm just hunkering down and just flying this thing with like the stick basically like under my chin as I'm hunched over. But,
the Viper checklist, if you lose the canopies, like lower the seat. Did you actually lower the seat?
Oh yeah, all the way. Yeah. And that was, so that the safety board, afterwards concluded that, so I went out and they took all these pictures of me in the seat. So when I lowered the seat, I didn't readjust the rudder pedals. And so they concluded that since I lowered the seat all the way, it was hunched over, when we hit the ground, or when I hit the ground, that initial impact pushed my feet down and locked up the brakes. I don't know if that's true or not. But so that was the big takeaway. Whatever changing the checklist was, if you lose a canopy, lower your seat, make sure you readjust your rudder pedals. So you don't lock your tires.
Kind of into the weeds on that one, fellas.
just a little. Yeah.
Like, what's the bigger picture here? What's really going on?
Yeah.
Well, F-16, I had the seat down all the way flying anyway. So I was just looking, I was like, if this ever happened, like, it's just not going to be good. Like, you're going to be going 200 knots minimum. Like, it's just not going to be good.
Yeah. And I'm a shorter guy, seat about halfway up type of guy as I sit. So I guess I'm lucky in that regard. And it wasn't, we do like 45-degree high angle strafe, which we were going to do. And had that happen in like a 45-degree dive, I think that'd be, I don't know what you do. I mean, that'd just be terrifying. But I think more so.
Do you guys have a 60-degree attack too? We
do. Yeah. It's more just like I've done it like twice in 10 years flying the Hog. So it's not something we do or execute in combat or really ever, but there are mills for it. Yeah.
Yeah. A 45-degree attack still, that's pretty steep. What is that normal? Yeah. What's that altitude and what's that range of like opening fire and recovery look like?
So the min altitude, which is what our abort parameters are based off of for 45-degree, is there's thin and thick. So if we're going after armor, we would do what we call a thick mills, and that's a 1,500 foot min altitude. And then a thin is 4,500 feet in altitude. Your base where you roll in, you're, around 10 to 12,000 feet AGL for those.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm making stuff up, but you've probably been somewhere around like 2,000 feet or so, I would imagine, had you guys been doing a 45-degree attack on that, right? Ish.
Yeah. Yep. Probably about the time that would have happened. Yeah.
I just cringe like thinking about that.
I know. Yeah. So, but yeah, that was it, man. It was, it was over. I went, got to take a ambulance to the emergency room. They did 14 vials of blood because no one knew what to do. That's the other downfall with the Guard is like, I just went to the Alpena County Regional, whatever, emergency room hospital in my flight suit. And they're like, wait, what you need? Okay, well, here's all the tests they need. And they're like, all right, I guess we'll take both arms. And they're just like drawing, no one knew what to do with anything. And finally, like after like a day, like active duty safety investigation team got there and they're like, okay, that was a little bit excessive, but here's what we really need. And everything's fine. And everyone can calm down,
Just take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Dude, that's wild, man. I cannot imagine what that would have been like. So awesome job. You're awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for that. So I want to hit a couple of highlights here in the citation, some of which we've already talked about, but while conducting low-angle strafe at approximately 150 feet above the ground, Captain Devries' gun suffered a catastrophic failure, which resulted in a massive explosion that caused the canopy to jettison from the aircraft, blowing out numerous panels on the belly of the aircraft and caused unknown flight control and potential engine damage. Without hesitation or direction, you wrestled the jet away from the ground and lowered the seat to reduce the high-speed wind blasts, quickly realizing that your flight path was taking you towards a large town of Grayling and the populous I-75 corridor. And with complete disregard for your own safety, you made a selfless decision to remain with the damaged jet and steer away from all the towns and civilian structures, which I think is huge. I know, like we've talked about that, at least I have in the sim, right? Like you find yourself in a populated area and you have some kind of catastrophic failure that was recommended or directs to eject. And do you make this objective call to stick with the jet or not, trying to point it away from all the townspeople? Because obviously that has happened in the past. It's unfortunate, but I imagine that that's probably going through your mind there a little bit once after the first 4 or 5 potatoes, when like what's going on and realize the canopy's gone.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, it's like that's a big, obvious, big I-75 highway, and there's a big city there. And once you're turned away from that, there's not a whole lot in northern Michigan. So we were able to go hold like over, just essentially farmland and determine what we were going to do at that point. So yeah, that's a very congested area. And then once we were able to fly it away from that initial spot, then the damage to the civilian was kind of, kind of gone. And then it was just to determine what's the best course of action. How do we just trash this jet with an ejection or not, basically. So
did that jet end up flying again?
It's sitting at Hill in the depot line, with all the budget cuts the cuts to the A-10, they kind of, they had to spin the depot line back up to get all the new wings, is what I'm told, on the jets. And so that's just sitting there like on the side. And as they have time, which apparently they don't have a lot there, they work on it. It was supposed to be done like over a year ago was the initial timeline. And I guess it's still just sitting there.
I mean, I've seen some of the pictures, like the damage does not look that significant. Obviously the gun damage and the internal hydraulic lines, that's probably the most significant piece of it, right?
Yeah, it was not even a Class A, which is kind of hilarious. Like, you lose a canopy, gun blows up, you land with no gear, and it was a Class B mishap, which was less than $2 million damage. Was the determining factor in that.
That's wild.
So, yeah,
that's impressive.
Yeah,
I did a couple of Class C investigations, which I think that dollar amount ended up being like $250,000 or $240,000, and it was like scraping a horizontal stab. Someone did that on a landing. Yeah. And so it was like sheet metal and feather, but it was like, if you did that, if you bellied up a Viper, it's probably going to be more than, it's probably going to be a Class A.
Yeah, I would think. Yeah, I would think. I guess that's one of the, the A-10's more of a simple, rugged, designed airframe. So maybe, that's a benefit of it. It's it doesn't, I guess it's not that expensive of an airplane, and it's not that expensive to fix when you're not worried about any, stealth or anything like, sensor type of stuff.
Yeah. Well, since the safety board really dug in and found the root cause of popping tires, did they determine the cause of the gun and what its malfunction was? Because, I mean, again, I would think that's kind of the focus.
Yeah, they did. And it was, I'm not going to get into how it happened, but the firing pin became loose and engaged or struck a round outside of the chamber, which caused an overpressure and an explosion. So,
yeah. Well, you're shooting big bullets, the size of like water bottles. So
you
can do a lot of damage.
A lot of bang. Yep.
That's wild. You recently got back, probably the past year or so, from an Afghanistan deployment, correct?
Yep. Yeah, we went last springtime to back to Afghanistan. Like I said, it was just our guard tour calendar, whatever dates lined up. That was our 3-month deployment that we did back there, which is one of the last A-10 deployments in Afghanistan. They just pulled all of them out of there now, so they're no longer in theater. But so that was pretty cool, I guess. It was the same. We went to Kandahar, which is the same place I went my first deployment ever in combat, and completely different than Kuwait. Every deployment's different, but it was the country was not nearly even remotely close to the presence when the first time I was there. So that was kind of interesting to see, like, all these FOBs and all this stuff that we had supported the first time I was there all over Afghanistan were either abandoned, some were used by the Afghans, and some were, had been taken over by other people. So.
Yeah. And that was gonna be my question, since you have that perspective and separated by many years. What did it look like as far as the fight for you guys? What were you doing, the first round versus what was an average sortie looking like on the second time you were there?
So it was actually interesting. Like, we weren't expecting a whole lot. The guys who'd been there before, with all the U.S. presence there before, and it was like the fighting was really, really intense. And you don't hear a whole lot about it back home. Weren't expecting a whole lot. It was actually like the complete opposite, because the only people over there for the most part while we were there was like special forces or like Army Rangers, like very aggressive mindset, and they were going out to either take down a target, or they were not hesitant at all to engage an enemy, just based on how they approach their fight versus the conventional forces. And so it was actually very kinetic. We were employing a ton of AGR-20s, which we had never shot before, the laser guided rockets. So that was interesting to do those for the first time. Just a lot of strafing compared to what I was doing last time. So that was interesting. We did. I was kind of talking to you earlier about too. We did one big strike package on a very large drug lab that was out there, and that was like the size of like maybe a little smaller, but really close to the size of like a red flag strike package. And it sounds weird to do it in Afghanistan when you had 2 fighter squadrons. The Vipers were at Bagram and the A-10s were in Kandahar. But the target set was so much that it was more than we could muster up at a time to handle with just even our 2 squadrons.
That's wild.
So we had every platform that was in the Middle East at the time all came up. Some of them flew like 2,000 miles just to even get to Afghanistan to do the strike package. And so that was cool. We did the full on, the roll call. We had to roll out all the stuff that you kind of train for. Roughly,
Yeah.
we don't do it a whole lot in the A-10, but we were there because it was like right in our backyard for where we were at. And we were there for the follow-on mission, which was, so we did the initial volley of strike package. There was, probably 80 plus bombs in the air at one time, from SDBs to 500 pounders. And then once all the assets from out of country, were done with all their targets, they left. And then the Vipers are up at Bagram, and the 6 A-10s that we had out, and I think it was a 6 ship of Vipers from Bagram. And our A-10s, myself and our flight lead and our package commander was our weapons officer, and then I was number 2, and we were both FAC-A instructors, and we started kind of yo-yoing back and forth to the tanker. So one would be on the tanker getting gas, while the other one was not doing FAC-A rolls, because you're not allowed to do a FAC-A, but we would just hey, ground commander would give us a bunch of targets, and then we would just pick who was going to drop what and when, and we were doing coordinated attacks with SDBs, GV-38s, GV-12s. Couldn't strafe that day, but it went on for quite a while until we got all the bombs off of all the jets. And I know the Vipers were doing it. We were doing it too. We were doing like GV-12 split laser coats off the same jet with like wingmen lasing, simultaneous impact, all like the weird attacks that you know are in the 3-1 and stuff. You're like, I would never, like, when would I ever actually do this? We actually were out and doing a lot of that stuff. So that was a really cool experience, actually.
That's what's wild, is just how much that's changed. And here, I mean, probably that strike package you're in, other than the opening days of Afghanistan, there's probably nothing like that, for so long.
No.
Uncontested environment, just cast wheels and zipping around. I can say, my OIR deployment, it was similar, right? There were a lot of strike packages, coalition, so it was very like red flag-ish. And then obviously a lot of CAS was mixed in, but it was kind of cool to go out there and do the stuff that you do in training. You're like, we'll never use this. This is it hasn't been used in 15 years. There's no point in doing this. And then here we are doing dive glides and stuff like that, which is kind of cool.
No, it was that was pretty wild. And that was like one of my last sorties there. I was like, all right, that's my last deployment. Like I said, I got like a year left, and I'm like, all right, that's cool. That's a good one to go out on. Like I'm good.
Yeah, going out on a high note.
Yeah, for sure. So
now, I mean, obviously flying the line in the squadron as a traditional guardsman. So hitting your requirements for the month. People typically say the 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year, but it's a little bit more than that, obviously. And then the plan, for you, just ride it out to next year and then retire, and then a full-time airline guy. Is that the route?
Yep. That's it. So then, another thing, if people listening aren't familiar, the guard retirement, like when I get that, it's very different than active duty, right? You don't see any of that until you're 60, but then certain Title 10 deployment or or contingency days will back that up. So I'm at like 57 is when I'll start collecting a pension. So it's there, it's a ways away, but so that's a big difference too with the guard. Like, a lot of people think, oh, you're retaring, from the guard, you get your pension right away. That's awesome. Like, well, no, not quite. I mean, it's there, but it's a ways down the road.
You're going to miss it, you think?
I'll miss, probably, I'm sure you could probably speak to this more than I could, just like the brotherhood, and just the squadron life itself. But I'm not going to miss getting a weekend back every month of my life. I'm not going to miss Sunday morning academics at 7 a.m., sitting there and all the other stuff that goes with it. Is just, it's almost enough to make it not worth it. It's not quite, obviously, because it's a blast to fly. And when you deploy, you kind of recages your mind, and, you realize the importance of what you're doing, but it does take a lot of your time to keep up with it. So.
Yeah, that's what I mean. People ask, I get asked that question. I absolutely do miss it. I mean, it's the brotherhood you miss. I mean, obviously flying the Viper is a lot of fun. There's a lot that goes with it, right? That's not as much fun, and a lot of sacrifices go with it. If I had to go back and do it again, I would do it all over. Like, it was a great experience and put me where I am today. But well, as we kind of wrap up the podcast, I always like to ask guests, if you found yourself, 15-year-old 2-watt walking down the street, is there any advice you would give him? Tell him to do something different?
I'm pretty happy with the route I went in the guard and everything. I guess if there was something else I could tell me, or if I could look back and do something different, I really did. When I first started, I wanted to fly the F-16, and that's what I got hired to do. But we got back to the A-10, and I just kind of stuck with it. And I would have liked to, I went out to pilot training out to Arizona, but I wouldn't have minded going and doing a guard tour like somewhere else. Like, this is where I grew up. This is everything. This is where all my family is and everything like that. And so it's kind of like, I've been at Selfridge for my whole career and everything like that. I really haven't experienced anything else. I kind of wish while I was younger, not necessarily maybe chasing another airplane or anything like that, but going and doing like, there's a lot of opportunities to go to to Europe or do tours with the military outside of like the bubble that I've been in like my entire career. And I think that's, it's a plus in the guard that you get to stay in the cockpit. Like, I'm not going to go do something else, right? I'm going to keep flying the A-10 forever, but it's also a drawback that you don't get the perspective on everything. And there are a lot of opportunities. And where I was in my mind when I was young, it's like, I got to get ready to deploy, which is true. And then I got to get hours because I want to get an airline job. And I wish I would have taken a little more time to go out and just broaden my perspective a little bit, maybe go to Europe for a year, do a tour over there, like working with the Army or just something like that, just to get a more of a full broad perspective of what the military really is. It's kind of, as I look back on it, I've talked to a lot of guys who have done that, and that's one of the highlights of their career, was being able to go out and take like their A-10 mindset, go integrate with, some NATO force in Europe or wherever, there's a lot of options to go do that type of stuff. And I shied away from it. And I wish, looking back on it, I think that would have been a great opportunity, a great experience to go do that.
Yeah. Do you think it's good for like a young guy to do like early in the career before family and things like that? Or is it
for sure
get a little more experience?
Yeah, exactly. So like once it's like, anything else, like once family starts to get involved and you start to grow as a family, it's like that now you're dragging, people around with you. And it just, for an active duty mindset, maybe that doesn't seem like, that's just the norm. You're going to PCF somewhere else. But for a guard guy, that's just like most people, this is where their roots are, and you don't just up and leave. You know what I mean? It's just a very different mindset. And so while you're young, you have these narrow windows to go do and experience certain things like that. And I personally kind of shied away from it because I was focused on my qualifications, getting the upgrades, and getting as many hours and trying to get an airline job. So
yeah,
it worked out. I mean, I don't have any regrets, but that would be a different path that I could have done. It would have been probably a great experience with a lot of good memories with it.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, Tuat, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat today. I know people will enjoy hearing your story, man. And to me, it's just like wild. It's awesome to be able to actually meet you virtually and chat with you, because after seeing the A-10 sitting on the ramp, it's wild. So that's such an incredible story. So awesome job with that. And again, thanks for joining me today.
Cool, Ray. All right, man. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks again for listening. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Be back in 2 weeks with another round.